Carl and Brendan here from Games, Brains and Head-Banging Life, gbhblofficial.com for short. And it's Sometimes Dead is Better, our Stephen King reviews, talk through where we look at adaptations of Stephen King books into movies. We are finally touching upon one that falls out of the horror genre. It is Stand By Me, the 1986 American coming-of-age drama, directed by Rob Reiner, and of course based on King's 1982 novella, The Body. So we'll start there. First things first, how familiar are you with The Body?
Very, I think.
Yeah.
I haven't read it in a long time. You know, it's
Yeah.
one of those things, isn't it? But I still feel like it's familiar to me.
Mm-hmm. It's a novella. There's not much meat to the bones here. I don't really remember it too well, if I'm honest. I don't know how, if you'd asked me how accurate is this film to the book, I'd probably say, well, probably not that much considering it's a novella.
Pretty accurate.
Okay. Well, the film itself was, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to just very briefly, like I think I've mentioned before on The Mist, that I actually think if they did some analysis of like adaptations when they work best, it seems that novella to film is the perfect length to not have to add too much or cut too much. You know, genuinely that's what my opinion. I've seen them try and do like, you know, the big ones by King, and you have to cut it to shit to make it a film. And the tinier, shorter stories when you have to add more to it to fatten it out. Whereas this novella length seems to almost be not quite, but almost straight away to screen. And then a novella translated to movie appears to come in at about 80-90 minutes. And some of King's in particular adaptations that I think are his best adaptations, or other people's best adaptations of his work, are novellas, which is essentially slightly longer than a short story, less than a novel. You know.
Yeah, you make a strong point, because I suppose we did do 1408, and that's a novella there itself. Well.
The Mist, Stand By Me. There's plenty of them. Like and actually, if you look at a lot of the ones that we
haven't not even done yet.
Yeah, but like but also the ones that I think the world widely regards as maybe poor adaptations are often book to film. And often the reason they're poor adaptations is people will say, doesn't make any sense, doesn't follow the storyline. What about this character? You dropped him out. What about this? You missed that out. And when these, I think sometimes when it goes to film, we'll talk about it obviously as we go anyway, but they sometimes have to change the direction of it because maybe the book does things that doesn't work quite as well on the screen,
or
but they can pretty much pack the content in. So, but anyway.
Yeah, you're right. Novella probably doesn't have as much character development as a film would be able to allow to have, because it gets a bit more room to breathe. And you do think of something, a good example of that is The Shawshank Redemption, of course, is probably arguably the best adaptation, certainly one of the best adaptations of a novella to film.
Green Mile.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. So Stand By Me was a box office success, earning about $52 million overall on its $8 million budget. So done well. So yeah, that's not a surprise. And what also isn't a surprise, that King was actually impressed with this film. He considers it to be the first successful translation of film of any of his works, which I thought was quite interesting because there were a few more before this.
Yeah.
Its cast is a who's who of famous names these days, more than anything else, I think. Then we have Will Wheaton as Gordon LaChance, or Gordy. Richard Dreyfuss, who plays the adult Gordon, which is a kind of blink and you'll miss it to a certain degree, or maybe if you're not that. When I think of Richard Dreyfuss, I tend to think of two particular roles. I tend to think of Jaws, of course, but I also think of a movie called Let It Ride. And it was that's my Richard Dreyfuss in my head. So to see him kind of clean shaven here and younger is always a little bit like, oh, okay, that's Richard Dreyfuss. River Phoenix as Chris Chambers, Corey Feldman as Teddy Duchamp, and Jerry O'Connell as Vern Tessio. Those are the four children. Then elsewhere, in a supporting role, you have Kiefer Sutherland, way before he's anybody, as Ace, the leader of the gang. Alongside him, we have Casey Simaseko as Billy Tessio, one of the ones, I guess, who didn't really go on to bigger things, at least as far as I'm aware from this film.
Yeah.
And then you also have John Cusack making his, what, third appearance in this series for us right now? Because what's that? 14 Away and Cell, and now Stand By Me. And he plays Denny LaChance, Gordy's older brother, who, of course, passes away before the events of this movie. Then we have Marshall Bell as Mr. LaChance. Well, that was a bit of a surprise for me. I didn't know, I don't know, I never really know the actor's name, but he's a face I recognize as being in a lot of films I've seen. The father, Mr. LaChance. So that was a nice surprise when he popped up. I was like, oh, cool, you're in this. And Frances Lee McCain as Mrs. LaChance. And that's basically the most of the on-screen characters that you do see.
Yep.
So there are bazillion and one facts about this film. So I think most people will know, people will be aware of certain details, some of them more obvious than not, whether it's obviously River Phoenix dying at a young age, post this film, who went on to be quite famous and who really didn't get out of the shadow, so to speak, of being these characters and things like that. We're not going to go through them. We're going to talk you through the film here to a certain degree. It is Stand By Me. Chances are you have seen it at some point in your life. On a personal level, it was a film I saw a few times when I was younger, but it had been a very long time since I rewatched it. And truth be told, thanks to parodies and references and pop culture stuff, I wasn't initially that excited about watching it, beyond the fact that, all right, it'd be cool to familiarize myself with the story. So rewatching it was initially a little off-putting. However, I ended up loving it again. I found myself captivated by almost everything. There are moments I think are a bit pointless and, you know, unnecessary and all that, but I just ended up thoroughly enjoying it all the way through again.
Yeah, it's be a hard film to not take enjoyment out of, like, you know. It's one of the things I think I also remember seeing it like a lot when I'm not probably more than once or twice over my lifetime, but when I was younger I remember seeing it. But I think when I saw it back then, I don't think I would have been really aware of who Stephen King was, or that it was anything to do with that, you know.
Yeah.
It was just a film, and it was like, oh, that's a nice kind of film. Kind of sat with me in those sorts of family movies, you know, like The Goonies and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
Like nice Sunday afternoon, kind of easy to watch sort of things. And it was only really when I was a lot older that I even probably became aware of Stephen King, and, like, you know what I mean, it was. So I think that's quite nice in a way, because a lot of the things I've watched because it's Stephen King.
Yeah.
And then there are a handful that I've watched being completely unaware, so it almost takes pressure off a little bit, like, you know what I mean. I'm not judging it based on King. I'm not going, right, let's see what they've done to King for that patient this time. You just kind of went in with clean eyes. But I find it, without it feeling like it, I find it's a very easy to watch film, but not in by. I don't mean as in like it hasn't got context. Like, do you know what I mean? There's still plenty of happening there, and there's a lot of like deep, meaningful moments that you can take out of it. But it's just a very easy to watch film, which is a lot down to, and I'm sure we'll touch on in here, which the actors and the relationships that they managed to portray on screen, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's something that maybe at a younger age I certainly didn't appreciate as much as I do as watching it as an older man now, and being more aware not just of the actors but the characters as well. So the story is framed from an older Gordy LaChance basically reflecting upon this incident in his childhood, and a significant incident. And this kind of comes when he reads a newspaper article about a stabbing, and he kind of reflects on that. Basically, it turns out that that's his friend, and he reflects on when he was around 12 years old with his best friend Chris Chambers alongside Teddy Duchamp and Vern Tessio. They basically heard about a missing boy, Ray Bauer, and they decided to go look for, basically an adventure, to go and look for his body after overhearing Vern overhears his older brother Billy talking about it with his friend Charlie. They actually found the body, but they don't want to go to the police because he also committed a car theft at the time and he doesn't want to draw attention to that. So Vern overhears that, tells the rest, and they're like, hey, you know what, this could be a fun thing to do. Particularly as early on it established the town is a bit of those one-horse town American places, and the kids aren't really going anywhere. Often when they talk about the future and getting out of the town and how they're perceived by adults and treated and elements like that. There's a lot of that in here. It should be noted as well, if you want your Stephen King reference, that this town is Castle Rock.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. They said it when he starts narrating it at the start. It says Castle Rock. I was like, oh, shut up, Stephen King.
This town, man, they had some serious shit going down here. Like the government need to get involved with Castle Rock.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, so we go to decide to look for it, and that's kind of how we build into it. We quickly sort of establish who they are in the pecking order of the town. You know, Gordy's parents, who kind of basically ignore him now, keep him to the side, having are suffering grief basically from the loss of his older brother Denny. It's not Gordy's fault. It's not even his parents' fault, but you can definitely tell, particularly from the mother's perspective, that Denny's death really hit him. They poured a lot of their hopes and dreams into him, a football star potentially, and things like that. Whereas Gordy's dream of being a writer doesn't quite mesh with his father.
Yep.
Yeah. So Chris steals his father's pistol, and they end up before they are getting their supplies, planning their head out. They actually run into Ace and his gang there, and that's when we first meet Ace. This actually really surprised me, as I vaguely remembered Kiefer Sutherland in this movie, but I always kind of remember him as being quite a one-note villain, as it were, one-note gang leader and stuff like that. The dude is banging in this. I can kind of see why, and I do wonder how many heads he turned at this stage that saw him eventually getting the role in Lost Boys and things like that, because other than being quite striking to look at, when he kind of goes quiet, he's got an intensity that I love. Here, when he takes the baseball cap and he insults them, but also at the end, I'm like, shit, I forgot a good Kiefer Sutherland in this minor role was in this movie.
Yeah, I think he's great. I always find, like, even though he clearly aged over time, he still looks old in this. Like, he doesn't look like a kid, does he? Like,
yeah, he's not a 15, 16-year-old, is he?
No. But like, I don't know how old he was, like, for real back then. He was obviously young enough. But like, yeah, he's got that kind of face that just looks like he never really aged. He just kind of got like became like 35 and just stayed at that for years and years and years. You know, I'm a fan of Kiefer Sutherland generally. Anyway, I like him. It's been a lot of films that I love, and I think he's really cool in here. I particularly like the sort of quite sinister but basic little thing they do when they have the little like matchstick in their mouth. Do you know what I mean? That little chewing on thing. And I think the threat, like, he does give off threat, but like, it's not even in the things he says or anything. It's his face, like the little looks, subtle looks, little mannerisms and stuff like that. So yeah, like, it's a minor role to a degree. I mean, it's quite pivotal in the story. Actually, it's quite an important role because it's that fear factor in it. It's that additional threat. The reason why, you know, they can't just saunter off and find the body, you know, and he plays it well.
Maybe you'll remember this, but how big of a role does Ace play in the story? But also, like, is this seems to be a King trope, maybe in a positive part, where when he writes bullies, he often puts puts a lead character that stands out more than the rest of them, and the rest are very goonish because the rest of the gang are basically forgettable. All right, one of them is the Chris's older brother, but he doesn't like Chris as well as that. But when I kind of think of like Stephen King's It as well and things like that, and how there's always one member from that gang, the leader normally, that's the one that you remember.
Yeah. I mean, in the book, Ace is as pivotal as he is in the film, to be honest. I think the difference that you get in the book is not just about Ace, but about characters in general. It's just a typical book thing, and that is that even Ace gets a bit of backstory. Everyone gets a little bit, like, you know, so it becomes more. It is obviously, even the book is still the story of the four boys.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's also the story of the town and the other people, and, like, you know, I guess, like, it does an all right job of conveying it in the film. It doesn't fuck it up or anything like that, you know. But obviously in the book you can just write it down, and that is, like, I guess it's almost like the layers, you know, the generational boredom of a town like this. So you've got the younger four kids, then you've got the group above that, then you've even got the parents above that, you know, and it's that kind of parents are threats to the older kids who are threats to the younger kids, and it's almost like that sort of generational backyard sort of town where everybody's kind of just following a path to almost like non-existence, you know. So the young kids have Ace's future to look forward to, and Ace has the junkyard guy's future to look forward. Like, do you know what I mean? It's almost conveyed like that. And Ace, I think you're probably right that, like, whether it's Stephen King or filmmakers or whatever, but like that making them look more eye-catching is probably important. I think that's a clever move. But I think it's also because of the fact that even the guys in the film one of them in particular, I can't remember the name of which one it is. They're not like so keen to kind of go and do all of this. No, it's like, do you know what I mean? Like Ace is clearly the ringleader. Like,
Yep.
for example, and we'll get to it in a bit, but when they play one of the world's greatest sports, which is mailbox baseball, it's very much Ace forcing them to do these things. So like, I guess if you're going to put a guy as a ringleader and say, you're going to be almost the bully of the bullies, you've got to stand out, and you've got to have something about you. And I think Kiefer Sutherland was a really good pick for that. I don't know if they knew it at the time. I don't even know how known he was at this time, like whether he was literally like, it's difficult, isn't it, when you look back at it now, because like you said, you listed out those names at the beginning. Most of those people are household names to all of
Yeah.
to a lot of people around the world. I don't know if they were all nobodies back when this was done.
I think the only one that was maybe the two that had a bit more buzz around them, at least in the kids' point, is Phoenix and Feldman, to a
Yeah,
certain degree. Phoenix probably more than Feldman than that, but certainly Jerry O'Connell, Will Wheaton, these were nobodies, and
yeah,
I'm 99% sure. I didn't look at his discography, his film history, but this has got to be an early role for Kiefer Sutherland, at least
yeah.
the recognizable name. But
Maybe
you're
even
right.
like John Cusack. I know it's only a minor role, but you imagine if John Cusack's a name by now, he isn't playing a minor role. Maybe he's playing something else. So
Well,
So,
yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
the people that cast this, assuming that some of these kids are coming in for auditions and all that, made some really fucking good choices, you know?
it is. I think I read an interview with Corey Feldman, and he says that one of the reasons why this film is so good as what it is they nailed the casting. They nailed it. I can't remember how I read that. And they got everyone perfect. Which kind of, because obviously now we're going to just spend time with the boys as they travel towards
Yeah.
the body, and this is kind of an important aspect of the four characters and actors. We'll combine the two, so we'll split the two, should I say? We'll do the characters and actors. Who as a character did you find yourself liking or enjoying the most? But actor-wise, who did you think was just knocked it out of the park?
Um, my favorite character is Chris,
Mm-hmm.
uh, by a long shot, and I also think he was acted very, very well. He was
Of
believable.
course.
Um, but in terms of just watchability, Corey Feldman's character is fantastic to watch. Like,
Yeah.
so I think Corey Feldman knocked it out of the park. Like at first, I remember like even rewatching it. My first instinct is he's overacting, but he's not actually, because he's playing his slightly deranged, slightly insane, sort of character perfectly.
Yeah.
And I think the overacting is almost like if he hadn't have done, if he tried to rein it in, it would have probably not been right. So I really enjoy Corey Feldman, so Teddy. But my favorite character in the books and in the film is Chris.
I think I match up pretty much what you're saying. I found Chris as a character to be infinitely watchable, infinitely likable, particularly as, he gets an emotional scene later on where he talks simply about reputation and how
Yeah,
he just hates that and how he wants to move on and get out of the town and stuff like that. But Corey Feldman, as an actor in this, particularly, I think he plays the most difficult and nuanced role potentially of all of them, because obviously his father is a mentally ill veteran,
yeah,
and even like has abused him to such a point where he burnt his ear off on a stove, and adults in the town use that against him as insults. We see that during the obviously infamous junkyard scene as well. That sequence there, I really, really found that incredibly, like, that's the shit I like.
yeah, yeah. He's also, even though it's coming from a place of sadness, his
Yep.
relationship with Vern in particular, but is a bit of kind of comic relief at times.
Yep.
So he also provides that, because I think if it was like Gordy and Chris are often engaged in quite deep, meaningful kind of conversations, aren't they, about their past, and they're very close and everything like that, you know. And then you've got the kind of threat of Ace and everything like that. And I think Teddy and Vern, the relationship between them, is really, really important, in the way that Teddy acts in that, to kind of like, he's always kind of just basically trying to turn everything into a joke.
Yeah.
It kind of applies that little bits that make you smile every now and then.
Well, thankfully, because it is a drama, we do have those moments of smiling. And a lot of it sometimes just comes down to interactivity. Like all children at this age, their banter back and forth is always insulting and stuff like that. But even there are moments when they think they take it too far and they kind of draw it back and they apologize or whatever and stuff like that. There's some good stuff between that.
Yeah,
The joy is just kind of watching them walking along and talking or singing a song and stuff like that. that I ended up finding I enjoyed the most, particularly because that's where we kind of get the depth. You know, that's where Gordy ends up confiding in the others about how his parents view him, or at least his father views him. That is, of course, is where Chris talks and breaks down about how he's perceived in the town overall. I think the only one that really doesn't get a strong moment like that is Vern, is the character of Vern, Jerry O'Connell, who
I think
might be...
Vern is kind of the comic relief in a way. I think that's what he was. I don't know if that's what he was meant to be. The one thing I would say that in the book, and it's the only thing that's really different between the book and this, but I do understand why, is that the book doesn't really take one character and make it their story, because I think actually this story is Chris's story, Chris Chambers' story. I know it's told from the perspective of Gordy, but even when he comes back at the beginning of the film, he's telling the story of Chris.
Yes.
Whereas the book doesn't really do that. It equally tells the story of all four. But I think, and I understand it, I'm not dissing it, like the reason to change that in the film is that you kind of need that more linear path. You know, we've got to like try and like focus in a little bit, you know. So you get a bit more about Vern and about parenting and everything like that in the back. In here, the deepest thing you really get about Vern is him digging for his lost pennies. And you know, and I think that's what they, you know, he's kind of used for. And that doesn't make him a bad character, because he's still quite watchable, but it's not, it's the interactions actually, because of him being, I don't know, like it's not because he's like chunky or anything, but he's a bit like clown-like. A lot of the other guys kind of interact with him in a certain way, which is what gives the light relief, you know, the way, especially Teddy and him in particular.
I think you're right, and I think he offers some light relief, and say not to the level of clownishness and all that, but just that light relief to a certain degree, and that kind of balances out, because he's the only one that doesn't seem to have a rough life in comparison to the rest, and I think that balances everything out nicely. And the journey is, as I said, we've got the junkyard scene, which I've got a lot of familiarity with and stuff like that in my head, but rewatching it, I'd forgotten it was quite as not just intense, but also really nailed that aspect of how kids ramp up basic stories. So obviously, it's around Chopper and the whole sick balls thing, and how they turn what is just a dog, a guard dog, probably quite a friendly guard dog outside of stepping into the junkyard, into this raging, slavering beast that will go for your balls. And that's done really well.
Yeah, absolutely. The theme with Gordy running and kind of like, you know, they try and almost bring that to life, you know, like through his fears inside him, and that it's absolutely hilarious. It's brilliant. But then obviously, like you said, then when they kind of get over the fence and that, and it is just a much smaller dog that looks like it's really just happy to see them. It's also got really probably the part, I guess, where I really kind of started to appreciate Teddy's character more as well, because the scene that then happens, and that's what I like about this film, like it does have depth, because that jovial sort of like enjoyable, almost entertaining, amusing almost scene of them running from the dog very quickly switches on its head when the owner of the dog comes out and starts hurling insults at them, Teddy in particular, and Teddy's dad.
Quite personal,
it gets it's pretty horrific, really. You know, especially considering they didn't actually do anything in there. I mean, Jesus Christ, they were on your property. They weren't like smashing the place up or anything like that, you know. And then you see sort of Teddy have pretty intense breakdown, like, you know, forget that he's a kid and he's determined to climb back over there and beat this guy to death somehow, because the others stop him.
Yeah, because he's in such a rage, you could certainly believe he'd do some bloody damage. Another major sequence along that route was, of course, the train track sequence. I don't know, maybe I'd seen it so many times, it doesn't do much for me, aside from how well shot it is and how impressive the whole sequence is in regards to the danger that must have actually existed.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think like it's the first time watching it, like, because you know, if you don't know what's going to happen, I guess if you haven't read the book and you watch the film the first time, you can have that doubt in your head that like maybe the train's going to hit one of them or something like that. But we know it's not, so it's enjoyable to watch. But at the same time, there's no real like stress or anything like that, is there?
No, indeed. But perhaps probably one of the more memorable sequences occurs later on when they camp down for the night and ask Gordy to tell them a story. So I think as a younger viewer, I probably found a lot more amusement in this side story based across the antics. But as an older viewer, I found it a distraction that I guess felt like filler now. And of course, we are talking about the story surrounding the character of Lardas, not our name, not us choosing the name. That is the name that is given to him. Basically, a Beast Boy wearing I would say questionable outfit to make him look obese, because he's not a big lad, really. That is, you can kind of see how they did it, stuff down his shirt, and basically enters a pie eating contest to get revenge on everybody who calls him names and deliberately throws up, which creates mass vomiting amongst the crowds and the people involved. And it's kind of done in that over the top, spraying out, what did it? Comedy way.
Yes, and actually, in the very first scene when he vomits over the other guy that was in the pie eating contest, you can clearly see like a hose on the other side of his cheek spraying the stuff out. So, you know, but look, I think the purpose of it, similar to the junkyard story and the running from the dog, is to try and show this imaginative, exaggerated imagination of these four youth, and the gross outside side of things is all vomit and lard ass and all that sort of stuff, you know.
Yeah, it's there. It is what it is. But it does at least lead to, and we've mentioned already, Chris's incredible scene, River Phoenix's incredible scene where he talks about his family's reputation and how it got to where it was, and he breaks down and cries with Gordy there. Yeah, that's kind of why River Phoenix was seen, like stuff like this is why River Phoenix had a reputation as a younger star. En route to the body, there we have the leech section where they go through the swamps, and Gordy finds one in his underwear. You know, again, just a fun little thing to have along the way. But eventually they do locate the body, of course, and I don't know how else they could have played this. I found this to be the moment I'd forgotten probably the most from this. I was always, and that's thinking back and watching, I was like, I don't really remember them ever finding a body. I always remember Ace coming along and that being a sequence that follows it, but I didn't remember all that. But the way they do this is really, really, really cold and hard to watch to a certain degree. And part of it comes from the lack of sound, the lack of music that fills it, but also, of course, the kids' reactions to it. The adventure doesn't play out how they felt. Turns out seeing a dead body, a young man, is not as cool as they thought. It's traumatizing, particularly for Gordy, who kind of breaks down here. I guess seeing that body makes him think of his older brother, and that relates back to his family. But yeah, this finding the body thing, it just feels incredibly hard.
Yeah, it feels deep, and it's like the culmination of, in their minds, this phenomenal adventure, you know, this journey that they've been on, which isn't really the journey geographically, it's more about everything else, you know. It's just like the end point. In a way, the body doesn't matter at all, you know. It was just, I guess, I don't know, their personal journey, wasn't it? But I think they play it well. I think the reaction to it, which is not to just be like, oh my god, cool, we found a body, run down and all that sort of stuff. I think the, you know, the sort of sadness and that is all done like really, really well.
Yet, of course, they change their mind about what they're going to do and decide that they don't want to be heroes, as it were, and basically just don't want to. They don't want to exploit the death. They kind of just want to get it known that he's here and leave it at that. But that kind of doesn't work out at first, because Ace, who haven't heard about the body throughout the film, has gone off with his gang to find it himself and make out that they're the ones who found it. And that leads to obviously a standoff between Ace, his gang, and our children here. A very intense one where Ace draws a switchblade, but involves Gordy end up using or pulling out the gun and threatening him. And it's done in a way because you kind of feel like, well, okay, Ace isn't going to back down, because why would he think the kid's going to shoot him? But it's done in an intense way that he can't be 100% sure, so inevitably has to back off from them. Back off from them considering the situation. He just can't be 100% sure. Things feel like they're spiraling, and he's not so stupid as to even bother taking a risk for the sake of what it is. It seems to be more his pride is getting hurt by the scenario, which is why he doesn't initially back down. But this is where I was saying at the start, this is Kiefer Sutherland at his absolute best here. I thought he was so threatening, but I thought everyone was brilliant in this scene. I hope they all came away feeling very satisfied with what they did here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great scene. It is like one of the bits of the book that actually is changed, because obviously in the book it's Chris who points the gun and says the line, "Fuck my fat one," or whatever it is.
Oh, of course, I know that. Yeah.
So I never really. I mean, it doesn't matter. I don't think it changes it in any way. But I guess because they tried to make it Gordy's story and or Gordy's story about Chris, that they gave it to Gordy.
Yep.
Whereas in the book it was Chris who did it, and it was kind of like, I guess, in a way I preferred it in the book, right? Purely not a lot, because it still works wonderfully in the film, but I guess it was seen as the kind of turnaround point for Chris, who's trying to break this kind of image, and it's him standing up to the guy that everyone thinks he'll become.
Yep.
Like, you know what I mean? So that was like in the book, that was particularly cool. So in here, it's Gordy. It doesn't ruin it at all. As you said already, Ace again, Kiefer is fantastic at it. But also just like I said, it's the way that it's. Sometimes it's the way that it's his gang members that almost make it as well, because the way they kind of scurry about and
Yeah.
do his beck, and it makes him more threatening. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how all the rest of these guys are like just like he clicks his fingers and they'll all just run off in any direction, and you know, and you do 100% believe that when he says he'll get them, that he will.
Yes, that is the one thing Stand By Me does not do a great job, because you are kind of like, and if you ever watched the Family Guy episode where they do a Stand By Me, they do a load of Stephen King stories, but done via Family Guy things. So they do Misery, The Shawshank Redemption, and Stand By Me. And even at the end of Stand By Me, the Family Guy thing, they make a point of going, well, like, what are we going to do tomorrow? Because he's going to get us tomorrow, right? Like that
Well,
kind of thing.
yeah, because interestingly, again, like I said, there are just a few minor changes in the book, and the book doesn't end at this point, and the book actually does go forward a little bit, and Gordy gets his ass handed to him by Ace,
Which you would think would
which
happen,
then
absolutely.
and then that way, when he comes back to the town later, like he does in the film here, because that's where he's essentially sitting in his car, like these are all this story is told through his memories, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he sees Ace again in the town as just like a grown-up old townie, and
Oh,
that's
that would
kind
have
of like
been
the
good to
completion
have,
of it,
wouldn't it? Yeah, that would have
you
been
know.
good to think to have in the movie, wouldn't it? Just that
But
full. I mean, probably
yeah,
unnecessary, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like that's what I said. Like, I mean, there are changes to the book, but none that particularly hurt it. And it's only because of the fact that you find Ace to be such a good character that you kind of want to see that come up. And it's like, to be
yeah,
fair, otherwise
yeah.
you wouldn't
You
really
are
care,
right.
you know.
No, you are right. You're absolutely right. But so the boys end up going back home and calling in an anonymous call to report the body of Ray Brower, and then they kind of part ways. And this is kind of where we get, I don't know, people might feel like it's a bit of a depressing ending, so to speak, or it's just like, but for me, it kind of fits the tone of the movie to a certain degree. As Gordy's finishing his memoir in modern times, Richard Dreyfuss's character, and he notes and talks about what actually happened to the rest of his friends as time went by. Vern and Teddy basically separated from him and Chris when they went to older school. And I
Yep.
thought that was really, really telling, because that is life.
Yeah.
That is life in general. As you get older, friends come and go, you drift, and suddenly you're not friends anymore.
Yep.
Vern married after high school, had children, became a forklift operator. Teddy tried to get in the army, but his eyesight, because he wears big glasses, and his injury to his ear stopped him being in the army, and he would end up serving time in jail. Did feel a little bit like, for that. But again, it felt like it matched the boy I'd spent time with.
Yeah, it's like that sort of almost broken personality, isn't it? Like, tries to join the army, gets let down, goes, "Oh, fuck it."
Yeah. And it's totally believable and realistic to what actually happens in real life as well.
Yeah.
And ultimately how abuse as a child, things that happen to you when you were a child, can have such a bearing on your eventual life too. So it's very deep on that
Yeah.
front. Chris did get out of the town, would actually take courses with Gordy in college. He would struggle, but would actually become a lawyer. And then they would drift apart as they became adults and went their separate ways. Which brings us back to ultimately the newspaper cutting, the clipping that Gordy was reading, and Chris had tried to break up a fight in a restaurant and was stabbed in the throat and died there. Really, really was like, oh, fuck, I forgot that was the thing. I'd forgotten it. So when it
It's
happened again,
sad,
I was
isn't
like,
it?
oh,
But
yeah.
it's also like kind of like perfect, isn't it? Because it's the full sort of cycle of Chris from what everyone thought he would become to, probably dying trying to rob a bank or something like that. But actually, he ended up dying protecting other people.
Yeah. There is that, there is that sweetness to it. And then Gordy finished up his memoir by being called out by his kids to come and play, and he chooses to do it. And of course, obviously, it ends with an infamous, probably famous line from the movies, which is, I want to say it, he ends the story with, I've never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12. Jesus does anyone. It's a minor role for Richard Dreyfuss, but thanks to his voice and how he portrays it, it's one that still stands out for me. It was just, it's a great actor. I always wish I see Richard Dreyfuss. I'm like, you're great. You should have more.
Yeah.
Listen, I feel incredibly positive about this movie. I'm really glad I rewatched it. I'm glad I didn't decide to do, because a part of me was thinking, you know this movie well enough. Do you really need to rewatch it? Can you not just kind of wing it on the notes that you remember? But I was like, no, do it properly, because there's probably going to be stuff you're going to miss. And I'm really glad I did. It's not something I feel like I would want to watch anytime again soon or regularly.
No,
But as a
no.
rewatch after easily a decade, if not longer, I
Yeah,
still think it's a
definitely.
great movie.
Yeah, so do I. I absolutely love. I think it's fantastic. I really do. I think it's. I love. I always adored, and I still do today. Even rewatching it recently, like the fact that the premise of this movie is four kids take a walk to find a body. Like that's the whole plot of this movie, right? And like, geographically, we don't know this, right? But I get the impression that they didn't walk 100 miles. It's just the way that the story is conveyed, right? These are just four kids. I mean, Ace and everyone like that turn up there about an hour and a half. So do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, even in a car, it's not going to be that. Yeah.
So this mammoth journey that they took on was probably 6 fields down the way, like sort of thing, But it's still it shows what you can do basically with the right cast, the right storyline, the right kind of relations and interactions and all that. That actually the plot of four kids, slightly troubled past, potential for troubled futures, at just go on a little journey, and then we just watch them evolve from the journey, and that's all it was. It's really, really simple, and it's so effective because I think even knowing everything that you know now about the actors that play these guys and everything like that, watching them as four children interact, there aren't many points in the film where I remember their actors. It feels natural, like
Yeah.
really, really natural, like I'm watching four kids be kids, which is just amazing, really. I
It
think.
is.
So, I think it's a really good. I mean, we talk about it as an adaptation, and it's a successful one of the most successful ones for sure. Um, so for me, like it's the sort of film that everyone needs to watch once in their
Yes.
lives.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
100%. 100%. I think you nailed it there. You've got to see this movie at least once in your life, even if you're the kind of person, or you are at this stage in life where you've never seen it and you're like, oh, I don't want to watch because all everybody does is talk about it. It's
Yeah.
not too long. You're talking about a 90-minute movie, 90-ish minute movie here, no longer than any other ones, especially compared to other adaptions. And at least in this series, although we're not many episodes into it, this for me is the best one we've done
Yeah.
to date.
Yeah, it is.
Stand by me. What do you reckon? You got any thoughts on it? You know what to do. Let us know in the comments.
Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please help us out by giving us a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button. If you really liked what you saw, consider donating to keep the website and channel running by buying us a coffee via our coffee page or picking up some merch from our Big Cartel store. You can check us out on gbhbl.com as well as via our social media, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, as well as listen to our interviews via SoundCloud, Apple Music and Spotify. Just search for GBHBL. Games, horror and heavy metal. What else is life for?